When the ground split open beneath me, I didn't scream. I'd already done that years ago, when the radio went silent and my brother's last words were cut off mid-sentence. "Don't let them be alone," he'd said. Tonight, standing over a field of broken concrete and sirens, I heard that same line echo in my head. Only this time, it wasn't coming from a soldier's dying breath. It came from under the rubble, a faint, desperate cry that no one else seemed to hear. The others yelled for me to pull back, to wait for the engineers. I didn't. Because when you've already watched the world bury someone you love, you stop waiting for permission to dig. And that's how I found him, small, trembling, covered in ash, clutching a silver chain that would one day make a 4-star general drop to his knees. My name is Sloan Archer, and I wasn't supposed to save that child. But that single cry rewrote everything I thought I knew about duty, loss, and who truly deserves to survive. Night had swallowed San Fernando Valley, leaving behind only the aftertaste of dust and burnt wire. Sirens wailed in the distance, rising and falling like broken breaths. We'd been digging for 3 days straight, 3 days of lifting, hauling, hoping, and now the monitors were flat. No heartbeats, no motion. Just the dead hum of failure echoing through the rubble. The order came through the radio, curt and final. Time to pull out. I stood there with my gloves half off, staring at the cratered remains of what used to be an apartment block. That was when I heard it. Something thin, almost imaginary, bleeding through the silence. A sound that didn't belong to wind or metal. A cry, soft, distant, but alive. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the fractured floor. It came again, muffled and fading, like a heartbeat underwater. My chest clenched. I keyed the radio. "Check Sector 4 again. There's life down there." "Negative. Captain. It's an echo." I ignored them. I stripped off my gloves and dug with bare hands, concrete slicing into my palms, breath turning to smoke in the cold air. Every scrape sent dust into my throat, but I kept going, because once you've lost someone to the dark, you recognize the sound of life trying to come back. 20 minutes later, my fingers broke through a hollow pocket. Inside was a flash of gray fabric, flight material, scorched and torn. I tore it wider and froze. A baby, barely breathing, face smudged with ash, a tiny fist gripping a silver chain pressed against its chest. AF32091R. The numbers were burned into the metal, like coordinates no one was meant to find. The child's eyes flickered open, glassy but searching, and for a second the entire valley felt still. Not dead, just holding its breath. I radioed in, voice shaking, found one survivor. Infant, breathing, static. Then a flat tone. Transfer to military hospital. I looked around at the ruins, at the ghosts of homes, of families, of people who once mattered. My pulse hammered in my ears. They'd taken enough from me already, not this one. Later, when the lists came in, names, ages, final counts, there was no mention of a baby. 0 infants recovered. According to every official record, the child in my arms didn't exist. A week after the quake, Los Angeles still coughed up smoke and dust. Power came and went. Like the city itself couldn't decide whether to keep living. I stayed behind at the field base to file reports that no one would ever read. The infant I'd pulled from the wreckage had been transferred to a temporary military hospital under a sterile tag, Unidentified Infant Nurture 6. Each day I checked on him through a glass wall. The doctor said he was gaining strength, stronger than anyone expected. I would press my palm to the glass and whisper, "You're tougher than all of us, kid." He'd sleep through the noise of generators like he'd already survived worse than this. That night, as I signed paperwork in a dim office trailer, I overheard 2 voices outside the hall. One muttered, "The Air Force already took the custody order." The other laughed softly. Why would the Air Force want a baby? The next morning, the bassinet was empty, sheets folded, monitors off, the tag gone. The nurse on duty wouldn't look at me. When I demanded answers, a young woman pressed a yellow envelope into my hand, her fingers shaking. "They said this was for you." Inside was a single piece of paper, creased and smudged, scrawled in blue ink, were 7 words. Don't ask who he belongs to. Just protect him. My throat went dry. I called FEMA command. No record of the transfer. The hospital's digital log showed infant Nursic's entire file deleted at 02:14 a.m., as if he had vanished from the earth a second time. By dusk, I drove back to the ruins of San Fernando, desperate for any trace. The air still smelled of burned insulation and grief. Near what had been the northwest wall, I found a shred of flight fabric half buried in ash. The letters E, Rourke stitched near the seam. The name hit me like a physical blow. Rourke, the same name as the general who had signed the strike order that killed my brother overseas. Standing there among the wreckage, dust stinging my face, I couldn't tell whether fate had handed me a second chance to save someone or dragged me back into a curse I hadn't finished paying for. 3 months passed before I handed in my resignation. The report said psychological strain, but truthfully, I'd lost faith in any system that could erase a living child with one keystroke. I filed the temporary guardianship papers myself, listed him as Eli Archer, and left California without saying goodbye. Montana was the kind of quiet that a city person doesn't trust. Mountains ringed the town like sentries, and the nights were black enough to hear your own heartbeat. I rented a small house, started teaching community rescue training, and tried to believe we were safe. Eli grew fast, steady hands, sharp eyes, the kind of calm only children of disaster seem to have. At bedtime, I told him stories about people who refused to give up under the rubble. He always asked if they made it out. I always said yes, even when I wasn't sure. One night, after he fell asleep, I opened my old laptop and typed the code engraved on the chain he never let go of. AF329R. The screen blinked red. Restricted access. Air Force Medical Evacuation Unit. My breath caught. That was the same division my brother had served in before he died. I hit print screen to save it, but the laptop froze, restarted on its own, and when it came back, everything was gone. No history, no trace. Outside the window, a pair of headlights lingered on the road too long before sliding away. The reflection of the light crawled across the wall like a warning. I picked Eli up from his bed, his head falling softly against my shoulder. His little hand still held the chain. "Who are you?" I whispered. "And why is the world so afraid you exist?" Autumn and Helena had that quiet kind of beauty that made danger feel impossible. For 6 peaceful years, my world had been only Eli and the small routines that held us steady. He was 6 now, all scraped knees and paper airplanes, his silver chain flashing each time he laughed. I almost believed the past had stopped chasing us, until the morning a stranger waited by the fence. He was tall, straight-backed, gray hair clipped short, jacket military cut. I knew that posture before he spoke. He introduced himself as Robert Gaines, retired Air Force major. He said he'd read my FEMA report from 2021 and came to return something that belonged to the boy. From his leather briefcase, he pulled a folder singed at the edges, an old Air Force record stamped classified. At the top of the page, the name hit me like a blow. Elena Rourke, flight medic, MIA. Gaines's eyes softened. "The necklace your boy wears," he said, "belonged to her. The world I'd built cracked. Rourke, the same name as the general whose orders killed my brother." I looked toward the schoolyard where Eli ran through the leaves, and in his laughter, I heard the sound of everything I stood to lose. Gaines added quietly that Elena had been presumed dead with her infant son during a classified air evacuation. The Air Force sealed the file for national security. I should stop digging. When he left, a black SUV lingered across the road, engine idling, windows tinted. That night, I opened the folder again. Tucked between brittle pages was a half-burned photograph, a young woman in a flight suit, her smile faint, the same silver chain resting against her throat. 2 weeks later, I realized safety had only been an illusion. My calls cut out mid-sentence. Emails vanished, Mailbox left open. Gaines stopped answering. I drove to the FEMA storage depot, where I'd locked away the baby's belongings. Inside the burned flight jacket, hidden in a seam, I found a micro SD card. On my old laptop, one file appeared, Flight 07, black box copy. Static filled the room. Then a woman's voice emerged. Mayday, this is Major Elena Rourke. Impact not from quake. System anomaly detected. If something happens. Tell my father, the mission wasn't an accident. The words repeated, fading in and out like a warning from the grave. My hands trembled. I thought of Liam's final message. If something goes wrong, make sure someone tells the truth. Sloan. I tried calling Gaines again. No answer. The next morning, the news announced his death in a single-car crash. The photo on the screen confirmed what I already knew. It wasn't an accident either. I replayed the video, pausing on the last frame. The cockpit's altimeter engraved with the words Project Catalyst. My heart dropped. The quake that destroyed a city wasn't natural. It was man-made. The woman in the recording had died trying to stop it. And the child sleeping in my house was living proof of what the military wanted to erase. Eli looked up from the floor where he was drawing airplanes. Mom, can planes cause earthquakes? Sometimes, I said, when the wrong people are flying them. He nodded and went back to coloring. Outside, headlights flashed once across the window, a camera lens glinting before disappearing into the dark. 3 months after Gaines's death, silence wrapped around our lives, like a storm waiting to break. Then came the envelope, thick paper, gold seal of the Department of Defense, an invitation to the National Emergency Response Honors in Washington. D.C. My name stood in bold, and beneath it, Guest of Honor, General Nathaniel Rourke. I almost tore it apart, but Eli saw it first. He asked if it was about the place where I'd found him. I didn't answer. He looked at the photo of the ruins on our mantel and said maybe we should go. Maybe they'd remember her. He shouldn't have known that name, but somehow, he did. So we went, not for honor, but to face the ghost behind the name Rourke. On the flight, I carried the black box recording in my coat pocket. My heart thudded like it had 6 years ago when I lifted him from the dust. The ballroom gleamed with medals and press cameras. I wore a black suit, the old FEMA pin at my collar. Eli sat beside me in a white shirt, the silver chain tucked beneath it. When they called my name, the lights hit, applause roared. Then Rourke appeared, silver hair, unreadable eyes. As I approached, Eli fidgeted, and the chain slipped loose, clinking against the marble. Rourke bent to pick it up, his face drained of color, his voice cracked. Where did you get this? From the Rubble, I said. San Fernando. His breath broke. That necklace belonged to my daughter. The room froze. Flashbulbs exploded. A reporter shouted if the child was truly his grandson. Rourke didn't answer. He just stared at Eli, eyes trembling with something that looked too human for a general. That night, the world exploded with headlines. Rubble Boy linked to General Rourke. Paparazzi filled the street. Near midnight, an unsigned email appeared. He knows. You're both in danger now. I stood by the hotel window, city lights fractured by rain. Eli slept with the chain against his chest. If truth was light, why did it hurt so much when it finally found us? 3 days later, the story had gone viral. The Pentagon summoned me to assist with clarification. They called it protection when they took Eli, words dressed as mercy. Rourke sat across from me at the conference table, face carved in stone. The officials asked for the black box. I said, the one that proves Project Catalyst wasn't an accident? Silence. I played the recording. Eleanor Rourke's voice bled through static. If something happens, tell my father. The mission wasn't an accident. Rourke's hands shook. That voice. That's Elena, he whispered. I told him she'd tried to warn him, but they silenced her. After the meeting, I was told to leave D.C., unofficial exile. When I reached the hotel, the door was broken. Laptop gone. The USB wiped. Eli, gone too. Relocated for security, I drove through the storm straight to Rourke's estate. Guards stepped aside at his command. His office glowed with lamplight. A man drowning in regret. He shouted that the truth would have destroyed everything his daughter fought for. I said quietly, "Maybe what destroys us isn't the truth. It's pretending we can live without it." Rain hammered the windows as I left. I wasn't afraid anymore. When they've taken everything, truth is all that's left to fight with. In the dark, I whispered, "Elena, I heard you. I'll finish what you started." 2 weeks after the investigation, a message arrived from an unlisted sender. Pentagon, AO 900 hours. Room B317. Bring nothing but the truth. I didn't need a signature to know who had sent it. The room was small, steel gray, humming with the cold. Rourke sat alone at the table. No medals, no uniform, only a tired old man, hollowed out by guilt. His eyes were rimmed red, his posture heavy with something that looked like surrender. Without a word, he slid a sealed envelope toward me. "My daughter wrote this before the crash," he said. Inside, the handwriting shook across the page. "Dad, if the quake comes, it won't be nature's fault. Project Catalyst is unstable. If we die, please don't bury it. Protect my child and the truth." The air left my chest. He stared at the floor, voice trembling. "I signed those orders. I thought I was serving my country. I lost my daughter to my own command," I told him quietly. "And I found your grandson beneath the ruins your orders made." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded once. "Maybe God sent you to finish what I couldn't." From his briefcase, he produced a small flash drive, the original black box recording, unaltered. "They erased your copy. This one was locked in her flight locker. You'll know what to do." My pulse raced. The truth I'd chased for years now sat warm in my palm, heavier than any weapon. He stood, his hand trembling as he reached for mine. "You saved him once from the rubble. Save him again from the world." I walked out of that room knowing the next step would decide whether we all burned or finally began to heal. 3 months later, Washington stood draped in flags and remembrance. The National Memorial for the San Fernando victims filled the air with quiet reverence. Cameras lined the edges of the reflecting pool. The ceremony broadcast live across the country. I stood among the guests of honor beside Rourke. Between us, Eli sat straight in his white shirt, fingers curled around the silver chain he never took off. When Rourke's name was called, he rose slowly, the crowd parting in silence. He didn't glance at the speech prepared for him. His voice, raw and unsteady, carried through the open air. "I once believed honor meant never admitting fault, but a soldier's first duty isn't to silence truth, it's to serve it." He paused, the wind catching his breath. "My daughter, Major Elena Rourke, died trying to prevent a tragedy we later called a natural disaster. It wasn't. It was human, and it was mine." You could hear nothing but the faint click of cameras. He looked down at me, his eyes wet. Amid those ruins, one woman heard a cry, no one else did, and she refused to walk away. She carried my grandson out of the ashes when I couldn't. The audience remained motionless, united in that fragile silence that only truth can command. The camera panned to me. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, my hand tightening around Eli's. He leaned closer and whispered. He remembered her. "Mom." In that moment, I felt something unspoken shift, the weight of guilt dissolving into something purer, quieter. Later, the Department of Defense announced the reopening of Project Catalyst, clearing Elena's name at last. The media called Rourke's confession the silence that spoke. No one ever published Eli's name again. The world, for once, let the story end where it began, in mercy. When the ceremony ended, Rourke came to me. "You carried more than a child out of the rubble," he said softly. "You carried the meaning of service itself." I met his gaze. "And you gave the truth a uniform again." We shook hands, not as a soldier and a rescuer, but as two people who had finally learned what it meant to stand unarmed before the truth. A year later, spring warmed Helena again. On the old rescue field, a small garden bloomed around a bronze plaque. The Promise Garden, for those who stayed when everyone else walked away. Rourke, Eli, and I planted a young oak beneath the clear sky. He'd retired nearby, teaching Eli how to fold a flag, to ride without falling. Life had gentled him. I pressed the silver chain into the earth. Eli asked why bury it, because promises need roots, not chains. Do promises grow? If you water them with truth. They do? Rourke smiled, resting his hand on my shoulder. You turned my punishment into purpose, and you turned your silence into honor. Sunlight washed over the plaque, gleaming like new metal. Eli's laughter carried through the breeze, and in it I heard the faint echo of a heartbeat once trapped beneath the rubble. Steady, alive, unbroken.